السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله، الحمد لله، نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد. So inshallah this would be the first class of a series of class talking about fiqh, and it would be like an introduction to the subject matter of fiqh. So inshallah I would not have a special text that I would be using, but rather it's some information that I have gathered with me, some information that I've gathered with me and that I have, inshallah, that I would share with you, inshallah, in these classes, inshallah. So in this class, we would be dealing with Mabadi al-Ashr for fiqh, which is the 10 things concerning fiqh and concerning any topic that a person should know about it. The person should have an idea about it. Okay, so these are 10 things that it is preferred that any person who studies a subject matter, that he knows about these 10 things about that subject matter. And we know the famous statement of As-Sabban, where he mentioned in his Hashiyah, he mentions in his Hashiyah the famous lines of poetry where he says, إن مبادئ كل فن عشرة الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة وفضله ونسبة والواضع والاسم الاستمداد حكم الشارع مسائل والبعض بالبعض اكتفى ومن درى الجميع حاز الشرف. So inshallah we would deal with these 10 things that is mentioned in these lines of poetry by As-Sabban rahimahullah and his Hashiyah. But before we go into these 10 things, I would like to mention what the class, that is our fiqh class, our introduction to fiqh, what are we going to talk about? So the first set of things that we're going to talk about are concerning the things, the Mabadi al-Ashara, which is the 10 points which every person should know concerning any subject matter that he decides to study. Right, so that's the first thing that we would talk about, and that will be the topic of today's class. Okay, then after that we would talk about Tarikh al-Fiqh, which is the history of fiqh and how fiqh evolved over time. So we will talk about the time in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the time of the Sahaba, the time of the Tabi'een, right? The time of the Mujtahideen, the scholars of Ijtihad. That is when the different madahibs start to flourish. Okay, so that would be that's the fourth thing that we will deal with. The fifth one, after the period of the four madahib, which is after they had died and their students had taken over. So Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad, we're going to talk about their time. Then we're going to talk about after their time, and how fiqh progressed after the time of these four imams. Okay. Then we were going to talk about fiqh in present day times. Then we're going to talk about the difference of opinion amongst the scholars, and we are going to talk about some of the reasons for those differences and how we should act when we are faced with differences of opinions concerning in a matter. And then we will talk a little bit about each of the madhahib, the madhab al-Hanafi, al-madhab al-Maliki, and the madhab al-Shafi'i, and the madhab of Imam Ahmad, rahimahumullah ajma'in. Then after that, we will talk about certain subjects that relates to fiqh, or certain offshoots of the subject fiqh. Okay, we're going to talk about certain subjects that relates to fiqh, inshallah, from different angles, from the fiqh that is now from different angles, inshallah. And we're going to talk about how to study fiqh, or one of the better ways, inshallah, to study fiqh. And after that, inshallah, we would, inshallah, have a next part. So that's in relation to part 1, which is the introduction to fiqh. Inshallah, we try to finish this introduction in maybe 6 classes, inshallah, or 7 classes. So today's topic would be the mabadi al-ashar. So the first mabda, which is al-had, which is like the definition for fiqh. What is fiqh? If anybody is going to study something, he ought to know what that thing is, right? You study about it. Before you study about something, you should know, first of all, what it is. So in relation to fiqh, we have the word fiqh in the lugha, that is linguistically. We have the linguistic meaning of fiqh. We also have the sharia meaning of fiqh. The sharia meaning of fiqh. And some things in Islam, for example, when we define it linguistically and in accordance with the sharia, right? The linguistic definition and the sharia, the definition in accordance with the sharia. So for example, if you're to define al-Rasul, al-Rasul is someone who is sent, right? That is linguistically. But in the sharia, it refers to a specific meaning. When you say al-Rasul, it means he is a mere human being who was sent to human beings with a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And he's sent to a people who opposes him, right? So this is in relation to the sharia meaning for al-Rasul. So a lot of terminologies, we take the same path concerning it, where we mention the linguistic meaning and then we mention the sharia meaning if it is needed. And sometimes what is needed is more than that. So for example, for fiqh, we need the linguistic meaning, to know the linguistic meaning of fiqh. What does fiqh mean in the language of the Arabs? And we also need to know the sharia meaning for fiqh. What does fiqh mean in the sharia? Because the word fiqh has been mentioned in the sharia. Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihuhu fi ddin. For example, that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for, he gives him fiqh in the religion. Right? So Allah subhanahu so Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions fiqh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions fiqh in the Quran. ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم. Right? When he mentions a set of people, he said in Surah Tawbah, فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. So he talks about fiqh. Fiqh is also mentioned in the Quran, right? And it's also mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in the Hadith. So we need to understand what is meant by fiqh in the Quran and the Hadith. And is that the same thing that is meant by fiqh in present day terms? So we have the linguistic meaning of fiqh, we have the Sharia meaning of fiqh, and sometimes we need another definition, especially if the scholars they operate with the terminology fiqh in a certain way. So, for example, we find that in the latter times there's a development in relation to fiqh, in relation to what is meant by fiqh. Okay, so the earlier times they had a meaning of fiqh, then we find that it developed into a next meaning, right? So we need to know, therefore, because fiqh has now developed into a next meaning, we need to learn, therefore, the technical meaning of fiqh. So we say AlFiqh istilahan, AlFiqh istilahan, okay, which is the technical meaning of fiqh, AlFiqh istilahan. And then we have also more than one technical meaning of fiqh. So fiqh, subhanallah, we find that in the different sciences of Islam, there is more than one meaning for the word fiqh in the different sciences of Islam. And inshallah, we'll come to that, because what happened is that some of the scholars, they put together the two meanings of fiqh. They put together the two meanings of fiqh. That is, they differentiate between they make the difference between the linguistic meaning of fiqh and the technical meaning, the Sharia meaning of fiqh. And then they make a next differentiation between the Sharia meaning of fiqh and the technical meaning of fiqh. But they don't differ between the two when it comes to the two different subjects where the scholars act or approach fiqh in two different ways. So inshallah, we would make sure that we note the difference in relation to the different scholars in the different fields in relation to fiqh, inshallah. So we'll start with the linguistic definition for fiqh. We say al-fiqhu fi al-lugha al-fahm, right? Fiqh in the lugha, the linguistic meaning of fiqh is al-fahm, which is to understand. قال الله تعالى قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول، أي ما نفهم. هكذا فسره غير واحد من المفسرين، مثل الواحدي في الوجيز وابن عطية في المحرر. So ما نفقه كثيرا، ما نفهم كثيرا. لكن but we need to note here that Shu'aib is talking to his people and he's talking to them in their language, right? And this is why some of the scholars of Lugha, they say that fiqh has a little bit more deeper meaning to it. More deeper meaning to it. It's not just understanding, but it is understanding and more than and a little bit more. So some of them say that it is that al-fahm al-daqiq, it is that intricate understanding of the matter of anything, right? And some of them says that it is a deeper understanding of something, a deeper understanding of something. So al-fahm is understand, because remember, Shu'aib, he was speaking to the people in his language. He was speaking to the people in his language, and they understood his language. Yet they are saying, we don't understand many of what you say. So they're meaning, and they didn't say we don't understand, we don't ma nafhamu. They say ma nafqahu. They use the word fiqh, ma nafqahu kathir. They use the word fiqh, right? Which is like so they understand the words, because we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions concerning the munafiqeen that they are a people who don't la yafqahun. They don't understand, they don't have fiqh. Now, they understood the Arabic language, okay? In the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were Arabs. They understood the Arabic language. They understood what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying. but yet they didn't understand. They didn't have the deeper understanding. That understanding that brings about action. That understanding that brings about action, right? So they didn't have that deeper understanding of it. Like they didn't understand the reality of what the Prophet ﷺ was saying. They had a superficial understanding of what the Prophet ﷺ was saying, right? But they didn't understand the reality and the greatness of the message of the Prophet ﷺ. So we could say that fiqh, even in the linguistic meaning of fiqh, it has it's that deeper or more intricate understanding. Okay, so we have, and the first ayah, which we mentioned, the ayah in Surah Al-Hud, which tells us or which indicates to us what fiqh means. وقال أعرابي لعيسى بن عمر شهدت عليك بالفقه. Right, so an Arabi said to Isa ibn Umar that I witnessed that you have fiqh, which is understanding, and we say which would mean deep understanding, right? To be more correct. So because we know that in the Arabic language, and this is a topic that is very vast in the Arabic language, where some of the scholars they deny the existence of synonyms in the Arabic language, right? There is always, even if no matter how much a word is similar, it has a different meaning, an addition, a subtraction, a different angle, where it means the same thing, but it's from a different angle, etc. Right? So that's a very lengthy topic in relation to the Arabic language, and if it has synonyms, if there is a lot or there are very little in the Arabic language or not. Even though we would find that, for example, the Arabs they would name an asset, for example, with many different names. Okay, there are many different names for an asset, for the lion, for example, in the Arabic language. Okay, and also we would find that there are many different names for a sword, but each one of these names has an or comes from a different angle, right, and has a different meaning to it, although it refers to one thing, although it refers to the sword or it refers to the lion, right, but it's from a different perspective, right? So that is what Ibn al-Qayyim and others say concerning the existence of muradif, which is synonyms in the Arabic language, right? So that it's hardly there if there is. So that is in relation to the linguistic explanation of fiqh, right? That is in relation to the linguistic explanation of fiqh. As for that is, so we conclude that fiqh linguistically means understanding, which is fahm, which is understanding, but it means like a deeper understanding, a deeper or more intricate understanding, right? A deeper or more intricate understanding. That is the conclusion, inshallah. Then we have the shar'i meaning for fiqh. The shar'i meaning for fiqh. What does fiqh means in the Sharia? Like the hadith that I mentioned. So in relation to fiqh and the meaning of fiqh in the Sharia, there are two major opinions in relation to the meaning of fiqh in the Sharia. First one is that it is the knowledge as هو معرفة النفس وما لها وما عليها. The knowledge of a person's self and what is against him and what is for him, right? So what is against him and what is for him in relation to his worldly life and in the akhirah. So we have knowing a person's self. That is what Imam Abu Hanifa, he mentions that is the meaning of fiqh, right? What would gain him reward in the hereafter, and what would cause him to be punished in the hereafter. What is a source of getting him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is a source of making him farther away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is what is fiqh according to some scholars. Ibn al-Jawzi also mentions that fiqh is the understanding of the Sharia. The understanding of the Sharia, be it actions, be it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing us in relation to Aqidah, or be it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us in relation to commanding us to do something and preventing us from doing something, right? So everything that concerns the Sharia, every hukum, every ruling that is in the Sharia, be it a ruling or something that is in Aqidah, something that is concerning the adab, the morals and etiquettes of a person, or something that concerns the action of a person, the al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, the rulings of the Sharia in relation to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has asked from us to do, right? Has asked from us to do. So we were saying that fiqh in the Sharia includes everything. Okay? Al-ilmu bil-Sharia. And it also includes the aspects of Aqidah. Okay? It also includes the aspects of Aqidah. So it includes everything in Islam. That is the meaning of fiqh in the Sharia term. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, in Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada, he has a very long, he went at length in talking about the Sharia meaning of fiqh. The Sharia meaning of fiqh. He went at length in talking about it. And he presented a lot of statements from the Salaf where they mentioned the meaning of fiqh. Rahimahullah ta'ala. And his conclusion is that fiqh is not only the knowledge of all of the rulings in the Sharia and in Islam, but it also includes acting upon it. And it also includes acting upon it. So it has to be coupled with action. And why he made this conclusion? He made this conclusion because if you look at the kalam of the Salaf, the statements of the Salaf, you would find that they would not attribute fiqh to a person. They would not call a person a faqih except if he has both. If he has full command and knowledge of the Sharia and he acts upon it. Right? So like for example with Hassan al-Basri, when a man came to Hassan al-Basri and he said to him, he asked him a question and Hassan al-Basri replied to him. So then he told Hassan al-Basri, this is not what the scholars of fiqh say concerning this matter. So Hassan al-Basri said, وَهَلْ رَأَيْتَ فَقِيهًا قَطْ? Have you ever saw a person who has fiqh? Who is a faqih? Have you ever seen one? So he's like rebuking him. You have not seen a person who is a faqih, right? It's like he's telling him, like, you haven't seen a faqih, or you don't know what is a faqih, right? So then he mentions al-faqih, the person with fiqh, is that person who is taqi, right? That person who has taqwa, that person who has wara', that person who has zuhd. That is the faqih, okay? Whose knowledge is manifested in his actions. And this is why, after a lengthy discussion in Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said that fiqh in the Sharia, according to the understanding of the Salaf, it means, as he said at the end, لم يكن السلف يطلقون اسم الفقه إلا على العلم الذي يصحبه العمل. طيب? That the Salaf would not consider fiqh except that knowledge that is with action. That is the knowledge. So we would say, for example, the ilm of fiqh, we would say that some of them say that it means, in a summary, in the Sharia it means al-ilmu بخطاب الشرع الطلبي والخبري, right? The ilm of the khitab of the address, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us, be it that message be something that we ought to believe in, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking from us to act upon. Okay, to act upon, right? And we said that Ibn al-Qayyim and Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada, he came to the conclusion that the Salaf understood the fiqh in the Sharia to be that this also is coupled with action. It is coupled with action. So knowing the ahkam of the Sharia, the rulings of the Sharia, be it that ruling be something that we ought to believe in from the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind, or be it something that we ought to implement or to act upon from his message to mankind. So that is, and we said that Ibn al-Qayyim added that we have to be that the faqih is the person who act upon it also. So it includes action. So it includes knowledge of these things and acting upon it. Knowledge of every area of the Sharia and acting upon it. So that is in relation to the Sharia meaning of fiqh. That is in relation to the Sharia meaning of fiqh. طيب. As for the meaning of fiqh in relation to the istilah, the technical definition of fiqh, we would say that if we talk about the subject of fiqh itself, then it is al-ilmu, right? It is the knowledge of the talabi speech of the Sharia, or the talabi discourse of the Sharia. Okay, the talab means to seek after, to seek after. So it is the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has directed us to do in the Sharia. So it would be the knowledge of the khitab al-talabi, which is the type of speech where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requests us to either do or not do, right? The type of speech where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is requesting from us, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is requesting from us to either do or not do. Al-ilmu bil-ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-amaliyah. That is what we consider fiqh. Al-ilm bi-ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-amaliyah. Okay? Which is the knowledge of the rulings in the Sharia that we ought to act upon. That is maybe a better way to put it over. So it is the knowledge of the rulings of the Sharia that we ought to act upon. That is better, inshallah. That is a better wording, inshallah, in English, according to the scholars of fiqh. Okay? Then we would have the scholars of usul al-fiqh, they would add. So they would say, al-muktasab min adillah, min al-adillah. Which is derived from the adillah. Al-muktasab min al-adillah, or they would say, al-ilmu bil-ahkam al-shar'iyya al-amaliyya min adillatiha at-tafsiliyya bil-istidlal. So they were only and they would add to that وَالَّذِي طَرِيقُهُ الْإِجْتِهَادِ. Right? And which the way to attain it is al-ijtihad. So they make the main fiqh specifically for the masail which the scholar has to exercise his knowledge in order to derive that ruling. So he has to exercise his knowledge in order to derive that ruling from the Quran and the Sunnah. That is what they consider fiqh, right? And it must be, so therefore it would be from the masail, the issues that are ijtihadiyya. Ijtihadiyya means that there is no consensus concerning it. Rather, the scholar of fiqh has to exercise his ability and his knowledge in order to deduce that ruling, or to come to a correct ruling concerning a matter, right? So either he deduced the ruling or he comes to a correct opinion, that is, the ruling is there and the scholars differed, and he comes to the correct opinion through using his knowledge, through using the knowledge that he has. Okay, so that is in relation to usul al-fiqh. A lot of people, when they give the ta'rif for fiqh, right, they mention the ta'rif. When they give the ta'rif, which is the explanation or the meaning of fiqh or the definition of fiqh, they mention the definition of the scholars of usul al-fiqh. They mention the definition of the scholars of usul al-fiqh, and the scholars of usul al-fiqh, they restrict fiqh to the masail, that is the issues which concerns or which has an attachment to what? Has an attachment to ijtihad, okay, which is the process where the scholar exercises his knowledge in order to derive the hukum, the ruling in the Sharia. So that is in relation to fiqh. So that is in relation to fiqh according to the scholars of usul al-fiqh, right? As for the scholars of fiqh, it is as we mentioned before. It is as we mentioned before, and we chose the last one, which is the knowledge of the rulings of the Sharia, that are ought to be acted upon. يعني الأحكام العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية. Okay, which is the ahkam that are ought to be acted upon. So after finish, that is in relation to the definition of fiqh according to the scholars of fiqh. And we mentioned after that the definition of fiqh according to the scholars of usul al-fiqh. So we have 4 meanings of fiqh. The first meaning is the linguistic meaning. The second meaning is the meaning in the Sharia, which is very vast. Then the third meaning is the meaning of the scholars of fiqh, which is a little bit more narrow. And then the fourth meaning, which is the most narrow one, which is the most restricted one, which is the meaning of fiqh according to the scholars of usul al-fiqh. Okay, so inshallah, I hope that is understood. Inshallah, we'll go on to what do they call this subject. Remember, we're talking about the fiqh. We're talking about fiqh, and we mean by fiqh the third meaning, which is the knowledge of the rulings of the Sharia that are ought to be acted upon. العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية. So it is known, this knowledge is known as ilm al-fiqh. It is also known as ilm al-furu', which is the knowledge of furu', which is like branches or issues, rough translation. Also known as ilmu furu' al-fiqh, and that is more, so the branches of fiqh, the knowledge of the branches of fiqh, or the knowledge of the issues of fiqh. It is also known as ilmu al-ahkam al-amaliyya, the knowledge of the rulings concerning outward actions. Right. So that is in relation to what it is known by. We would take al-ilm, ilmu furu' al-fiqh. We would take 3 of them, which is ilmu al-fiqh, ilmu furu' al-fiqh, ilmu al-ahkam al-amaliyya. So that is 3 names for this subject. The third thing that we ought to talk about, which is mentioned in the poem, إن مبادئ كل فن 10 الحد والموضوع. But we mentioned the name first, right? Although he mentioned it at the end, we mentioned it first because of its importance. Okay. So our order is not the order of Sabban in his line of poetry. So we have al-hadd wal-mawdu'. That is, what does fiqh talk about? It talks about the actions of the mukallafin. And mukallafin are the people who are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward or punish if they act in accordance, they are being rewarded. And if they disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are being threatened by with a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that person is a mukallaf, right? Is that responsible person. That responsible person, which is, as I said, the person who is being rewarded if he does an act of goodness because of his doing it, and who is being punished or being threatened by a punishment if he disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? أفعال المكلفين من حيث الحكم. Right? So in relation to the actions of people who are responsible people, their actions and the ruling concerning their actions. The ruling concerning their actions, be it from a point of worship or from a point of mundane activities. Okay, that is what it talks about. So it talks about what is obligatory upon a person, what is mustahab for a person to do, what is makruh for a person to do, what is mubah for a person to do, what is allowed for a person to do, and the list goes on. Right? So if something is obligatory upon a person, that is what it deals with. If something is mustahab for a person to do, that is, it is something that is loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they will deal with that. If something is allowed or it is not allowed, the knowledge of fiqh deals with that. So the knowledge of fiqh deals with al-halal or haram mostly, right? And the acts of worship and how to perform it and the like thereof. Masail al-fiqh, the different types of masail al-fiqh. If you want to categorize the issues that fiqh deals with, we would say that the first set of masail, the first set of issues that they deal with is the issues concerning the worship of a person. Okay, so the first set of issues that they deal with is the issues concerning the worship of a person, from salah, from zakat, and the list goes on. The other category of things that they deal with, that is the scholars, that is the other set of issues, which is under the fourth heading, that is the issues concerning fiqh. The other set of issues that they deal with, القسم الثاني الأحكام المتعلقة بأفعال الناس وتعاملهم في الأموال والحقوق. So the rulings pertaining to the actions of people and their mundane activities and how they act with people and how they deal in relation to their wealth and in relation to the rights of others, etc. And this is called mu'amalat, right? This is called mu'amalat. So that is the second part or the second set of issues that is dealt with in fiqh, right? And remember, this is the fourth heading, which we're dealing with the issues of fiqh. What are the issues of fiqh? That is the fourth heading, right? So we have the first thing. The first set of issues are the issues concerning one's worship. The second set of issues are the rulings concerning the actions of a person and how he acts and how he acts with others and how he deals with others in relation to the rights of others, in relation to the wealth of others, etc. And that is called mu'amalat. The third set of issues in fiqh are al-ahkam al-muta'alliqah bil-usra, the rulings concerning al-usra, which is the family. So that is in relation to him having a relationship, in relation to building a relationship, a family relationship, getting married, the issues of talaq in relation to divorce, the issues of divorce, the issues concerning nafaqah, which is him spending on his family, and the list goes on. The issues concerning him being a guardian over who he's a guardian over, who is not a guardian over, and the list goes on. So that is al-ahkam al-muta'alliqa bil-usra min nikah, right? And the list goes on. Then we have the fourth set of issues in fiqh, which is الأحكام المتعلقة بالسلطان الحاكم على الرعية. So it is talking about the fourth set of issues is talking about the rulings pertaining to one who is in charge of the people. The person who is in charge, the rulings pertaining to him, and the person who is under their charge, who is under his charge, the rulings pertaining to them also. Okay? So the rulings pertaining to the person who is in charge of the people, be it the emir, be it a king, be it the emir, right? Whoever it is, the rulings concerning him and how he ought to act and what he ought to do in relation to bringing good to Islam and elevating the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making it high and supreme, and also those under his care, right? In relation to dealing with those under his care also, and in relation to how the people under his care deal with them, deal with the sultan, with the person who is in charge. So that is the fifth category, and it also includes qada, which is like jurisprudence, judgmental affairs, disputes, dealing with disputes and stuff. It also includes him handing out punishments, ta'zir, right? All of this comes under this category. So now, then the next ism, which is how he deals with the people that are not under his care. So this one is dealing with how he deals with people under his care, and how people under his care deals with him. Now we have how he deals with people who are not under his care. So if there's a next country, for example, how he deals with the other country, how he deals with countries from different faiths, for example, and the list goes on. These are the aspects that fiqh as a subject deals with. Also, we would find that it also sometimes deals with rulings concerning akhlaq and adab, etc. We will also find that some of the fuqaha, they pay special attention to rulings concerning akhlaq and adab, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is really, if you are to look into a fiqh book, or you're going to read a fiqh book, these are the things that you would expect in a book of fiqh. As for the thamara, the fifth thing, or the fifth point from the 10 points that we mentioned that every person should know, it is, what is the benefit of learning fiqh? So the main benefit of learning fiqh is that we could know Allah's commands and act upon it, and know His prohibitions and stay away from it. So this is from the main direct benefit of fiqh. As for where fiqh comes from, al-istimdad, where do we get these masail from? Where do we extract it from? So it comes from al-kitab was-sunnah wal-ijma', right? These rulings, the rulings of the fuqaha comes from where? From the book of Allah, and from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and from the ijma' of the scholars. That is the consensus of the scholars. And these three, that is al-kitab was-sunnah wal-ijma', there is a consensus among the scholars that these three are where the scholar of fiqh derives the ahkam from, right? Where the scholar of fiqh derives the ahkam from. So we have the book of Allah, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the authentic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the ijma', which is the consensus of the scholars. Now we have other adillah, or other means, or other places where they extract, where the scholar of fiqh uses, or other things where the scholar of fiqh uses it to gain a ruling in a particular matter. And from that, from those things that the scholar use, that the scholars differ upon, is al-qiyas, which is analogy, right? And that is the Zahiriyah. So the scholars, the four A'imma, and Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, they all agree upon the validity of qiyas. Dawud al-Zahiri, he does not agree concerning the validity of qiyas. But him and also Ibn Hazm, he does not agree in relation to the validity of qiyas. Also, in relation to this Maliki scholars, they act upon what the Medina, what the people in Medina used to do, right? Amal Ahl al-Medina, and the like thereof. We have, like for example, the Sharia of those before us, right? We have the statement of the Sahaba, and the list goes on, of the things where the scholars differ concerning if they would consider it a place or something that we could derive fiqh from or not, that we could derive fiqh from or not. So that is in relation to where the fiqh is derived from. In relation to al-wadi', some of them would say that the Prophet ﷺ is the one who put together fiqh. And some would say the scholars of ijtihad, the scholars that came after the Prophet ﷺ and made ijtihad, those are those who put together fiqh, right? So if we look at the wahi, we would say the Prophet ﷺ would be like the one who learned his companions fiqh, right? So he's like the wadi, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, right? But if we were to, like for example, put it into, like if we were to mean, for example, the madahib, fiqh al-madahib, the fiqh of the madahib, then it would be the scholar of each madhab, he is the one who put together his fiqh. So for example, Abu Hanifa, his students put together his fiqh, Abu Hanifa's fiqh. And Imam Malik, he mentioned certain things in al-Muwatta, and then his students gathered his statements and put together his fiqh. And Imam Ahmad the same. And Imam Shafi'i, he wrote his fiqh in al-Umm, right? So that is in relation to who put together this the subject. The eighth thing, right? The eighth thing, we're over time. I think we're over time. Should we continue or we'll close here and continue next week? Okay, so we stopped at the eighth one, inshallah. We stopped at the eighth one, inshallah. We're going to continue, inshallah, next week, inshallah. So with this, inshallah, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.